In this lesson, we're going to talk about multidimensional arrays. You can confuse yourself very quickly with multidimensional arrays, but I can just give you this word of advice. Multidimensional arrays are exactly like single-dimensional arrays, except the only difference is it requires more than one index to get at one element. So a multidimensional array is just like a bucket. Say it's a multidimensional array of strings. And you may have 9 elements in that bucket, 9 different string compartments in that bucket. All right, and if it is a two-dimensional array, it would have 3 by 3. In other words, you would index 0, 1, 2 on the first index, and then or the first dimension of the array, and then the second dimension of the array you would have indexes 0, 1, 2, and that would allow you to find the given item inside of the bucket. So you can think of a two-dimensional array like a grid or a matrix or a table or a spreadsheet, whatever the case might be, as you see on screen right now. And to get at one of the items inside of one of the cells of the table, so to speak, you would merely use the row as one dimension and the column as a second dimension to find the given value inside of a cell, right? That's simple. If we add a third dimension, so we're working with 3-dimensional arrays, and you can think of that as like a cube, like a Rubik's Cube. Rubik's Cube have, I guess you could say, 27 items in it, 9 on the top, 9 in the middle, and 9 on the bottom, all right? And so you can find any given element. Suppose each of the little boxes in the Rubik's Cube have a string inside of them. All right, you had to crack it open somehow with a pair of pliers, but it had something inside of it. Well, you can still find any of the items in that array by referencing the 3 dimensions, the width, the height, and the length. Okay, to get at any given of the 27 elements inside of that multidimensional array. All right. I realize that might have lost you. You know what? I have barely used multidimensional arrays in my career. I'm not saying that it's not out there. Like if you have, if you're working for, I don't know, something that deals with 3-dimensional space, you might need a multidimensional array, but typically you don't need that sort of thing. You're going to learn about collections, which are much more powerful than arrays, and much later in this series, and you'll use those most of the time. Okay, but I want to show you this because once I got asked, well, do you cover multidimensional arrays? It's a computer science topic. Computer science departments love to talk about arrays. I don't know why. In the real world, you don't use them that often, at least not in business applications, maybe in certain mathematical applications or science applications. I don't know. So at any rate, what I have here, as you can see, is the beginnings of an application, CS-ASP_022. You can download this. You'll go to the before folder inside of that zip file and load it into your copy of Visual Studio, just like I've done here. And what this is, it's a simple travel pricing schedule. So I can find out how much it costs to go from Chicago to New York for this particular airlines. It only runs 3 different, or I guess what, 6 different routes. I don't know. We'll have to figure that out in just a moment. From Chicago to New York, from Chicago to London, from New York to Chicago, from New York to London, and from London to Chicago, and London to New York. Okay, so we want to determine the prices for each of those, and a two-dimensional array would help us to figure that out pretty quickly. Okay, so what I want to do is just to begin with is start with creating a multidimensional array, and we'll do that by creating a new double, and we'll indicate that we have 2 dimensions by putting a comma inside of the square brackets. Now we have 2 dimensions, 1 dimension, 2 dimensions, okay? And we're going to call this price grid, all right? And equals new double 3 by 3. Okay. So again, 0 is Chicago, 1 is New York, and 2 is going to be London. And so what I'm going to do at this point is just I'll type in the first one or two, and then I'm going to paste in the rest, so you can get the idea here pretty quickly. Also, I'll be typing all day. So to reference the first element, I would do, if I wanted to go from Chicago to New York, so the first dimension will be 0 for Chicago, and the second dimension will be 1 for New York, and I would set the price of that equal, since it's a double, I would set it equal to like $350, okay? And so then the price grid to go from Chicago to London would equal $750, okay? And then the price grid to go from New York to Chicago would be maybe like $400, right? And we can just continue that on, but I'm going to paste in some code because I don't want to type all the rest of these. All right, like so. Now, what we can do is to access the price, let's go result label.text equals, and we'll do, we'll just hard code one here, price grid, and go 1 to 2. So we're going to go from New York to London and get that price. And we're going to have to do a toString on this, I think, to get this to look right. Might even do a string.format with a currency to get it to be actual dollars, right? But I'm not going to do that right now. So in the page load, we're going to populate all of the elements of the multidimensional array with values, and then immediately retrieve one of those values and print it to screen like we've done here. Okay, great. Now, what if we wanted to allow the user to select from the radio buttons and then click OK and then determine the result? Well, what we'll do is we're going to need to somehow define the price grid in the page load, or at least that's what I want to do. I guess I could put it in the OK button click event, but I'm going to do something a little bit different this time. I'm going to actually create a variable that's outside of the scope of the page load and outside of the scope of the OK button, so that it can be used by both page load and OK button. So in other words, if I created this price grid variable here at this level, so let me go ahead and do that. Double, and then I'll create 2 dimensions there, and I'll go price grid. Now I've just declared it. I haven't actually initialized it to any values. I haven't even said how large it will be. But then here in this code, I'm going to go price grid equals new double 3 by 3, like so. Okay, now inside the OK button click event, what I want to do is I can retrieve the value of the price grid, you know, like so. And I could print that out in the result label or whatever the case might, or actually I went too far there. There we go. I could print that out in the result label or whatever the case might be. And how can I access price grid when it's being declared here? It has to do with variable scope, and we're going to talk about that in the very next lesson. So just keep this in mind, this example, because we're going to revisit it and talk about variable scope. But by defining it outside of the boundaries of page load and OK button, it's accessible to both of those methods. Okay, so now let's finish up the logic for the rest of this application. Basically, I'm going to determine which city the user selected as the from city, and which city the user selected from the to city, and then use those as the indexes into the array to find out what the price should be for that particular flight. Okay, so we're going to get the int from city, and we'll go if from Chicago radio button dot checked, then we'll set the from city equal to 0, right? Because Chicago is 0 in our little guide up there. All right. Else if from New York radio dot checked, then the from city would equal to 1, and then else can only be one other choice. The from city would have to equal 2. Okay. Let's just clean up that. We don't need that. Great. In fact, I could clean this up a lot by just putting it all on one line here. And I think for small applications like this, this would work just fine. There, that looks clean to me. All right, now we've got to do the same thing to get the from city, or rather the to city. Int to city. All right, it's almost identical. To Chicago radio dot checked. Then the to city would equal 0. Else, if the to New York radio is checked, then the to city is equal to 1, and then else the to city is equal to 2. Now here's the big check we need to do. We haven't created values for 0, 0, 1, 1, and 2, 2. Why not? Because why would you get a flight from Chicago to Chicago? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So we're going to create a little logic in our application. If the from city is equal to the to city, then what we want to do is just exit out of our OK button click event. We don't want to continue executing any code. So the way to do that is to use the return keyword like so. So now if that's true, if they've picked Chicago for both of the entries, we'll just exit out. All right, we won't even worry about it. All right, so the last thing we need to do is result label.text equals, go to the price grid, and now we'll use the from city as the first dimension index and the to city as the second dimension index, and then we'll just do a toString on it. Okay, see how that works? And now let's go ahead and run the application. And the user can pick New York to London. Well, hold on a second here. We've got one little problem. Let's get rid of that. That's getting in the way. All right, so let's go from New York to London, and it's $700. Let's go from Chicago to London. It's $750. Let's go to London, and it won't change anything. We probably should in that particular case. Let's go ahead and modify this one more time to do this. We'll set the result label.text equals to an empty string. So we'll just clear it out in that case so as to not confuse anybody. So let's go through that scenario one more time. The first time through, we'll go London to Chicago and get a value, and then what we'll do is we'll go London to London and click OK, and it'll just remove that value. All right, so that is the notion of multidimensional arrays. Again, it's simple if you keep it clean in your head. You're just using additional indexes to get at elements. There are still elements, there's still compartments inside of the bucket, but the way you access those compartments, you just add another dimension to access it, okay? As opposed to one dimension like we did in the previous lesson, we do 2 or 3 dimensions, and it's easy to visualize that if you think about a grid in a 2-dimension, a cube in a 3-dimension, and beyond that, then you got to start thinking about other dimensions. But it's definitely possible. Okay, and then also in the next lesson, we're going to talk about scope of variables and how was it that I was able to define this variable outside of the scope of those two methods and yet still use it inside of those two methods. And then also we talked about the return keyword. Okay, so that's all I have to say about this. We'll see you in the next lesson. Thank you.